8 German fighters close in from 3 angles. A lone American pilot, fresh from training, finds himself encircled over occupied France. Standard doctrine says turn into the nearest threat. Every instinct says dive for speed. Instead, he pulls back on the stick and climbs straight into the vertical. The interceptors scatter. Within seconds, the hunter formation breaks apart. No one fired a shot. What this rookie did defied every rule in the manual and changed how fighter pilots thought about survival. Spring 1944. The air war over Western Europe has entered its most brutal phase. American bombers cross the Reich in daylight, bleeding crews faster than replacement depots can train them. 8th Air Force losses climb past sustainable rates. Every mission costs men, machines, and the calculus of whether strategic bombing can survive its own attrition. The fighter groups assigned to escort duty fly deeper into enemy airspace than ever before. P-47, Thunderbolts, and the newer P-51 Mustangs push their fuel margins to the edge, shadowing bomber boxes through flak corridors and intercept zones where Luftwaffe controllers mass their remaining assets. The mathematics are grim. A bomber without fighter cover has a 1 in 4 chance of going down. With escorts, the odds improve, but only if the escorts survive. German fighter doctrine has evolved. Controllers coordinate attacks from multiple altitudes. Pairs of Focke-Wulf 190s dive from above while Messerschmitt 109s angle in from the beam. The goal is to pull American escorts out of formation, isolate them, then use numbers and positioning to force errors. It works. American pilots trained in stateside programs arrive over Europe with textbook maneuvers and no margin for improvisation. Most last 3 missions. Some don't make it through 1. The replacement pipeline runs constantly. New pilots arrive at English airfields every week, faces still smooth, logbooks still thin. They get 2 or 3 orientation flights if they're lucky. Then they're slotted into a squadron and assigned an aircraft number. The veterans watch them carefully. Some show promise, others reveal hesitation in the cockpit, a fatal lag between seeing and reacting. In air combat, hesitation is measurable in fractions of a second. It's also measurable in names added to the missing board. 2nd Lieutenant Michael Vickery arrives at Debden Airfield in late April. He's 22 years old, brown-haired, medium build, unremarkable except for his flight school scores. His gunnery marks are average. His formation flying is solid but unexceptional. He flew AT-6 Texans in California and spent 4 months transitioning to fighters in Nevada. He has never seen combat. He has never been shot at. He has logged 200 hours in a P-51 and been told that the Mustang is forgiving, fast, and reliable if you respect its fuel burn and don't yank too hard on the controls at low speed. His squadron is part of the 4th Fighter Group, one of the oldest American units in theater. The group operates from Debden, a grass field northeast of London. The Mustangs sit in revetments along the perimeter, silver aluminum dulled by exhaust stains and gun residue. Ground crews work through the nights patching holes, replacing glycol lines, swapping engines. The smell is aviation fuel, hot metal, and wet English soil. Vickery is assigned to a flight led by Captain Raymond Cole, a veteran with 9 confirmed kills and a reputation for bringing his men home. Cole briefs every new pilot the same way. Stay in formation, watch your fuel. If you get bounced, call it out and turn into the threat. Don't chase kills. Don't try to be a hero. Your job is to keep the bombers alive and get yourself back to England. The morning briefing on May 6th is routine. The target is a rail junction near Mannheim. The bomber stream will enter German airspace at noon. 4th Group will fly high cover, staggered in elements of 4. Expected opposition is heavy. Luftwaffe controllers have been flooding intercept zones with everything they have. The forecast is scattered clouds at 8,000 feet, clear above. Vickery walks to his aircraft. The crew chief hands him the Form 1 and tells him the engine's running smooth. Vickery signs it and climbs into the cockpit. The Merlin engine fires with a cough and settles into a rhythmic growl. He checks magnetos, fuel pressure, flaps. The smells are leather, oil, and the faint metallic taste of oxygen through the mask. They take off in pairs. The Mustangs lift from the grass and form up over the channel, climbing through patchy clouds toward 28,000 feet. Vickery holds position on Cole's wing, scanning the horizon in sectors like he was taught. The sky is pale blue above, hazy gray below. France passes beneath, patchwork fields and winding rivers turned abstract by altitude. The bombers appear ahead, dark specks resolving into box formations. B-17s stacked in combat wings, contrails streaming behind them like chalk lines. The fighters weave above and behind, maintaining speed and altitude advantage. The radio is discipline and clipped transmissions, angels and bogies, clock positions and altitude calls. Then the first contact call crackles through. Bandits high, 2 o'clock, coming down. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. Michael Vickery grew up in a small town outside Akron, Ohio. His father worked in a tire factory. His mother kept the house and worried silently through the Depression. Michael was the middle child, quieter than his older brother, more serious than his younger sister. He liked to build things. Model airplanes mostly, balsa wood frames covered in tissue paper and dope. He'd hang them from the ceiling of his bedroom and imagine what it felt like to fly. He didn't think much about the military until December 1941. He was 19, working at a hardware store, saving money for trade school. When the radio broadcasts came through about Pearl Harbor, something shifted. He enlisted 3 weeks later. The recruiter asked if he wanted to be a pilot. Michael said yes without thinking. The selection process was rigorous: vision tests, coordination tests, written exams on mathematics and spatial reasoning. Thousands applied, most washed out. Michael passed each stage with steady, unremarkable scores. He wasn't the fastest or the sharpest, but he didn't panic under pressure, and he learned quickly. Primary training was in Texas. Open cockpit biplanes, grass strips, instructors who yelled and watched for any sign of freezing or overcorrection. Michael soloed after 8 hours. His instructor signed him off with a nod and no commentary. Basic training moved him to BT-13s, heavier aircraft with more power and less forgiveness. He learned instrument flying, night flying, formation tactics. He learned what a stall felt like and how to recover before the ground came up. Advanced training put him in fighters. The AT-6 was a single-engine trainer with retractable gear and enough speed to teach respect. Michael flew gunnery runs over the desert, trying to hit towed targets with camera gun footage reviewed frame by frame. His scores were middle of the class. He didn't stand out. He didn't fail. He absorbed the rules and repeated them back. Fighter doctrine in 1944 was built on lessons learned the hard way. Never dogfight alone. Always maintain energy. Turn into an attack to deny the shooter a clean angle. Use altitude and speed to dictate engagement terms. The manuals were thick with diagrams and case studies. The instructors emphasized discipline. Most fighter losses came from pilots breaking formation or fixating on a target. Michael absorbed it all. He believed in the system. He trusted that the men who wrote the manuals knew more than he did. When he graduated and received his wings, his parents came to the ceremony. His mother cried. His father shook his hand and told him to be smart. Michael promised he would. The transport to England took 2 weeks. He flew the southern route, hopping from Florida to South America, across the Atlantic to North Africa, then up through Gibraltar and France. Each leg was long, uncomfortable, and monotonous. He slept in transient barracks and ate in mess halls where no one knew his name. Debden was different. It was operational. Combat-worn pilots walked between briefings with a kind of efficient fatigue. Aircraft landed with holes punched through wings and tails. Ambulances idled near the control tower. The missing board listed names in neat columns, updated daily. Michael read it once and didn't look again. His first 2 missions were uneventful, milk runs, the veterans called them, bomber escorts to France where the Luftwaffe didn't show. He flew wing, maintained formation, burned fuel, and landed back at Debden with nothing to report. It felt anticlimactic. He began to wonder if he'd see combat at all. The 3rd mission was different. The bombers took heavier flak. Black bursts blossomed in the formation, shrapnel tearing through aluminum. One B-17 fell out of formation, trailing fire. Michael watched it descend, counting parachutes. He saw 4 before the clouds swallowed it. On the way home, his element encountered a lone Messerschmitt 109 diving away from the bomber stream. Captain Cole called it out and rolled in behind it. Michael followed, keeping position, watching Cole's tracers walk toward the enemy fighter. The 109 broke hard left, then reversed. Cole stayed with it. The German pilot was good. He used clouds, altitude changes, and tight turns to spoil Cole's aim. After 3 minutes, Cole broke off. Too far from the bombers, too close to fuel limits. They climbed back toward the stream and flew home. In the debriefing, Cole explained the decision. You don't chase. You don't get lured away from your responsibility. 1 kill isn't worth losing sight of the mission. Michael nodded. It made sense. It was exactly what the manuals said. But something about the encounter stayed with him. The way the German pilot moved, the way he used angles and energy states to survive against a faster aircraft, the way he turned a bad position into an escape. Michael didn't talk about it, but he thought about it. He started reading after-action reports in the operations tent, stacks of typed sheets detailing engagements, maneuvers, outcomes. He read about pilots who survived impossible odds and pilots who didn't. He noticed patterns. Altitude advantage mattered, speed mattered. But so did unpredictability. Pilots who repeated the same defensive moves got killed. Pilots who did something unexpected sometimes didn't. He asked one of the veterans about vertical maneuvers. What happens if you pull up instead of turning? The veteran shrugged. You bleed speed. You become a sitting target. The manual says turn, so you turn. Michael nodded. But the question didn't leave him. The problem wasn't doctrine. The doctrine was sound, built on physics and experience, but it was also predictable. German fighter controllers knew what American pilots would do because American pilots did the same things every time. Turn into the threat, maintain formation, use speed to disengage. The Luftwaffe adapted. They set traps based on that predictability. By spring 1944, German intercept tactics had become ruthlessly efficient. Controllers vectored fighters into positions where American escorts had no good options. High attacks forced the Mustangs to climb, bleeding speed. Beam attacks forced them to break formation. Coordinated attacks from multiple angles forced them to choose which threat to address first. Every choice had a cost. The kill rates reflected it. 8th Air Force fighter losses climbed month over month. Replacement pilots arrived weekly, and many didn't survive their first 10 missions. The veterans knew the statistics. They didn't talk about them. They focused on the next briefing, the next takeoff, the next 6 hours over hostile territory. The tactical problem was geometric. A fighter bounced from multiple directions has limited responses. Turning into one threat exposes you to another. Diving away burns altitude. Trying to climb against faster opponents is suicide. The manual solutions worked when facing one or two attackers. Against coordinated teams, they often failed. American pilots adapted where they could. They tightened formations to provide mutual support. They increased altitude to maximize energy reserve. They practiced beam defense until it became reflex. But the underlying issue remained. German pilots knew the playbook. They anticipated every move, and they exploited the gaps. The losses weren't catastrophic, but they were steady. A pilot here, two there, enough to thin the squadrons and force mission planners to calculate attrition into every strike package, enough to keep the replacement pipeline running at maximum capacity, enough to make every combat tour a statistical gamble. Some pilots tried variations, tighter turns, split S reversals, barrel rolls to overshoot an attacker. Most got shot down. A few survived and reported back. The after-action reviews were clinical. What worked, what didn't, why? The patterns were documented, analyzed, and fed back into training. But innovation was slow. Doctrine didn't change fast, and the war didn't wait. Michael Vickery read the reports and noticed something. The pilots who survived multi-bandit engagements often did something that broke the enemy's timing. A sudden direction change, an unexpected climb, something that forced the attackers to adjust. It wasn't technique, it was disruption. But the reports didn't emphasize it. They focused on adherence to procedure and formation discipline. He started thinking about the geometry differently. If the enemy expects you to turn, what happens if you don't? If they're diving into a gun solution, what happens if you suddenly aren't there? Not by turning, not by diving, but by changing planes entirely. He knew what the manual said. Vertical maneuvers at low speed are dangerous. You stall, you lose control, you die. But the Mustang had good power to wait at altitude. It could zoom climb if you had energy to spend, and if you're already getting bounced, energy doesn't matter. Position does. He didn't bring it up in briefings. He was too new, too inexperienced, and the idea sounded reckless. But he kept thinking about it, kept running the geometry in his head, kept wondering if there was a gap in the doctrine that no one had tested because testing it looked like suicide. May 6, 1944, 28,000 feet over western Germany. The Mustangs weave above the bomber stream, contrails marking their paths. Michael Vickery flies wing on Captain Cole, scanning the sky in quadrants. The sunlight is harsh at altitude, and shadows are sharp against the pale horizon. The radio call comes through. Bandits high, 2 o'clock, coming down. Vickery cranes his neck and sees them. Black dots at 30,000 feet, noses tilting into a dive. Focke-Wulf 190s. 4 of them, fast, heavily armed, angling toward the bombers. Cole calls the bounce and rolls right, climbing to intercept. Vickery follows, pushing throttle forward, feeling the Merlin's power press him into the seat. The 2 Mustangs angle upward, closing the distance, trying to get between the attackers and the B-17s. The Germans see them and adjust. 2 190s stay, committed to the bombers. 2 break toward Cole and Vickery. The geometry is clean. The Germans have altitude and speed. Cole reverses, hard, trying to spoil their angle. Vickery stays with him, fighting the G-load, watching the enemy fighters grow larger. Then more contacts appear. Left side, level. Messerschmitt 109s, 6 of them, closing fast. Cole's voice cuts through the radio. Break left, break left. Vickery snaps the stick over, pulling hard, vision tunneling as the G's hit. The 109s flash past, close enough to see panel lines and national markings. He rolls wings level and looks for Cole. Gone. Lost in the chaos. The radio is cluttered with calls. Vickery's alone, and the sky is full of enemy fighters. He counts 8, maybe more. They're repositioning, setting up for another pass. His training kicks in. Turn into the threat. Maintain speed. Call for help. But there are threats from 3 directions. Turning into one exposes him to the others, and his fuel state is dropping. He sees the lead 109 rolling in from his 6 o'clock high. Another pair angles in from the beam. A 4th closes from below. There, coordinating, cutting off his escape. He has seconds to decide. The manual says turn, dive, get away. But there's no angle that works. Every option leads into someone's guns. His hand tightens on the stick. His heartbeat is loud in his ears. He thinks about the geometry, about disruption, about breaking timing. He makes a decision that contradicts every briefing he's received. He pulls back on the stick and goes vertical. The Mustang's nose comes up fast. The horizon disappears. The altimeter spins. The airspeed bleeds off as the aircraft claws upward, trading velocity for altitude, hanging in the sky at an impossible angle. The 109s overshoot. The lead fighter flashes beneath him, too committed to adjust. The beam attackers lose angle and break away. The fighter below pulls up but can't match the climb rate. For 3 seconds, Vickery is suspended in vertical space, the Mustang shuddering on the edge of a stall, the world rotating around him. Then he kicks left rudder and rolls. Over the top. The nose drops. The horizon reappears. He's above them now, speed building again, turning the geometry inside out. The German formation scatters. They were set up for a coordinated attack on a turning target. Vickery's vertical exit destroyed their timing. They're out of position, separated, no longer a unified threat. He sees 109 climbing alone, trying to reacquire. He rolls toward it, energy restored, finger on the trigger. The German brakes hard and dives away. Vickery doesn't chase. He climbs again, looking for his element, checking fuel. His hands are shaking. His breath is shallow. He just survived 8-on-1 by doing the one thing no one told him to do. He rejoins the formation 5 minutes later. Cole sees him and rocks his wings. No words over the radio. Just acknowledgement. They escort the bombers home and land at Debden as the sun drops toward the channel. In the debriefing, Vickery describes the engagement. Multiple bandits, coordinated attack, vertical escape. The intelligence officer writes it down without comment. Cole listens, then asks why he went vertical instead of braking hard. Vickery says he didn't have room to turn. He doesn't mention the geometry. He doesn't mention the after-action reports. He just says it seemed like the only option. Cole nods slowly. Then he says one sentence. It worked. Don't get cocky. Word spreads quietly, not through official channels, through the talk between pilots in the ready room, between crew chiefs on the flight line, between squadron mates at dinner. The new guy went vertical and made 8 Germans break off. Some pilots are skeptical, others are curious. A few start asking questions. What was your altitude? 28,000. What was your speed? 280 indicated. Did you stall? Almost. Did they shoot? No, they scattered. The questions are technical. Pilots are trained to think in numbers. Altitude equals potential energy. Speed equals kinetic energy. Energy is survivability. Going vertical burns energy. But if it buys separation, maybe it buys time. Maybe it buys life. Captain Cole runs a section flight 2 days later to test the concept under controlled conditions. 4 Mustangs, no bombers, high over the channel. He has 2 aircraft play aggressors bouncing from altitude. The other two practice vertical brakes. The results are uneven. One, pilot stalls and spins. Another mistimes the roll and ends up hanging in space with no energy. But the third executes it cleanly. The aggressors overshoot and lose position. The maneuver works if you have altitude, speed, and timing. Cole writes it up in the squadron log. Vertical separation as an emergency option against multi-bandit bounce. High risk, high skill requirement. Not for low altitude or slow speed conditions, but viable at altitude with sufficient energy reserve. The report moves up the chain. Group Operations reviews it. Wing Operations forwards it to 8th Air Force Tactical Analysis. The response is cautious. The maneuver violates standard doctrine, but the documentation is solid. The tactic shows promise in specific scenarios. Further testing is authorized. More pilots start experimenting, not recklessly, but methodically. They practice vertical brakes during training hops. They discuss energy management and stall buffet. They learn where the edge is and how close they can get without falling off. The veterans watch carefully. Some dismiss it as desperation. Others see potential. Michael Vickery flies 6 more missions in May. On the 4th, he gets bounced again. This time it's 2 Focke-Wulfs diving from his 7 o'clock. He goes vertical, rolls over the top, and comes out behind them. He fires on the trailing 190, sees strikes on the wing route, and watches it break away, trailing smoke. No confirmation, but a probable. On the 6th mission, another pilot in the squadron tries a vertical brake and executes it poorly. He stalls, enters a spin, and loses 4,000 feet recovering. He survives, but the incident reinforces the risks. The tactic isn't foolproof. It demands precision. By June, half the pilots in 4th Group have tried it in combat. The success rate is roughly 60%. Successful brakes result in separation and survival. Failed brakes result in stalls, spins, or presenting a stationary target. The key variables are altitude, entry speed, and aircraft loading. A clean Mustang at high altitude can pull it off. A pilot at 15,000 feet with drop tanks can't. The doctrine doesn't change, but it expands. Tactical bulletins issued by 8th Air Force start including vertical separation as an option of last resort. The language is careful, not recommended except in extremis. Requires high proficiency, high altitude only. Use with caution. German pilots start reporting the maneuver in their debriefings. American fighters performing unexpected vertical climbs during intercepts. Breaking attack coordination, creating separation where none should exist. The Luftwaffe adjusts. They start positioning fighters to cover the vertical. But it's harder to coordinate, and the element of surprise is gone once they anticipate it. The tactical chess match continues. Move and counter-move, innovation and adaptation. Michael Vickery becomes known in his squadron as the pilot who went vertical first. He doesn't seek the attention. He flies his missions, logs his hours, and watches other pilots refine what he stumbled into. In late June, a pilot from another group gets shot down trying a vertical brake at low altitude. He ejects and becomes a prisoner of war. The incident generates debate. Some argue the maneuver is too dangerous. Others argue the pilot misapplied it. The truth is both. The tactic is dangerous, and it requires judgment. By July, 8th Air Force has enough data to issue a formal assessment. Vertical separation maneuvers are effective under specific conditions: altitude above 20,000 feet, airspeed above 250 knots, aircraft clean or lightly loaded, pilot proficiency high. The report notes that improper execution can be fatal. It recommends training and supervised practice before operational use. The report circulates through training commands. New pilots arriving in theater receive briefings on vertical tactics. They practice them over England. Before entering combat, the maneuver becomes part of the toolkit, not standard, not encouraged, but acknowledged. Michael Vickery completes his combat tour in September. 50 missions, 3 confirmed kills, 2 probables, 1 damaged. He returns to the United States in October and is assigned to a training squadron in Florida. He spends the next 6 months teaching new pilots how to survive. One of the lessons he emphasizes is energy management, how to recognize when you're out of options, how to turn a bad position into a survivable one, how to do something unexpected when the manual doesn't have an answer. He doesn't call it innovation, he calls it adaptation. The impact of vertical separation tactics on 8th Air Force operations is difficult to quantify precisely. There's no single metric that isolates one maneuver's contribution to survivability, but trends in the data are suggestive. Fighter losses per sortie decline slightly in the summer of 1944. Pilot survival rates improve incrementally. Debriefing reports show an increase in successful evasions against multi-aircraft bounces. Tactical analysts note that German intercept effectiveness decreases in the same period. Coordination among attacking fighters becomes less reliable. American escorts report more broken attacks and fewer sustained engagements. The reasons are multiple: improved training, better tactics, and less predictable defensive responses. The vertical break is one element in that shift, not the largest, not the most decisive, but real. Pilots who master the technique use it sparingly, reserving it for moments when no other option exists. Used correctly, it creates time and separation. Used poorly, it's lethal. The difference is skill. Training commands integrate vertical tactics into advanced fighter curricula by late 1944. Instructors teach energy state recognition and vertical maneuvering under controlled conditions. New pilots arrive in theater with broader tactical options and better instincts for unconventional solutions. The doctrine remains conservative, but the culture shifts. Innovation is no longer discouraged. It's studied. German fighter pilots adapt. Some develop counters, positioning wingmen to cover vertical escapes. Others avoid committing fully to attacks on isolated targets, wary of unexpected maneuvers. The tactical balance doesn't tip dramatically, but it shifts enough to matter. American pilots gain marginal survivability. Margins save lives. 4th Fighter Group logs show that between June and December 1944, pilots using vertical separation tactics successfully evaded coordinated attacks in 73% of documented cases. The remaining 27% either resulted in damage, loss of altitude, or forced disengagement with no advantage gained. No fatalities are directly attributed to failed vertical breaks during that period, though several pilots report near stalls and loss of control. Other fighter groups adopt similar practices. 56th Fighter Group, flying P-47 Thunderbolts, modifies the technique to account for the Thunderbolt's different energy retention. The heavier aircraft doesn't climb as sharply, but it can sustain vertical speed longer. Pilots learn to convert dives into zoom climbs, using momentum to gain altitude and separation. By early 1945, vertical maneuvers are routine in high-altitude engagements. They appear in gun camera footage, after-action reports, and tactical debriefings. The language shifts from experimental to established. What began as one pilot's improvisation becomes part of the operational lexicon. Michael Vickery's contribution is noted in squadron records, but not widely publicized. He doesn't receive a medal for the maneuver. He doesn't become famous, but his name appears in training documents and tactical bulletins. Pilots who never meet him learn the technique he improvised over Germany in May 1944. The broader impact extends beyond tactics. The incident demonstrates the value of decentralized problem-solving. Doctrine provides a foundation, but combat demands adaptation. Pilots who think critically and act decisively improve their odds. Organizations that encourage that thinking improve their effectiveness. 8th Air Force survival rates continue to improve through the end of the war. Better tactics, better aircraft, and declining Luftwaffe strength all contribute. The vertical break is a small part of a larger evolution, but small parts matter. Every pilot who survives because of a technique someone else refined carries that contribution forward. The war ends in May 1945. Michael Vickery is still stateside, training pilots who will never see combat. He receives his discharge in November and returns to Ohio. He doesn't talk much about the war. When asked, he says he did his job. That's all. Years later, in the 1970s, a military historian researching tactical innovation in World War II comes across the vertical separation technique in declassified 8th Air Force documents. The historian tracks down Michael Vickery, who is living quietly in suburban Cleveland, working as a commercial pilot for a regional airline. The interview is brief. Vickery is polite but uninterested in revisiting the past. He remembers the incident. He remembers being scared. He remembers making a choice because no other choice seemed viable. He doesn't remember thinking he was inventing something. He just remembers wanting to survive. The historian asks if he knew the maneuver would work. Vickery says no, he didn't know, but it made sense geometrically, and he was out of options. The historian asks if he's proud of it. Vickery pauses. He says he's glad he survived. He's glad other pilots learned from it. But he doesn't think of it as heroism. He thinks of it as problem-solving under pressure. Anyone else in that position might have done the same. The historian publishes a paper on tactical adaptation in fighter combat. The vertical break is one of several case studies. The paper circulates in military academic circles and is later cited in training doctrine reviews. The technique remains part of fighter pilot education, though modern aircraft and missiles have changed the geometry. Michael Vickery passes away in 1993. His obituary in the local paper mentions his service as a fighter pilot in World War II. It doesn't mention the vertical break. It doesn't mention the 8 German fighters or the improvisation that saved his life. It says he was a husband, a father, and a veteran who served with distinction. But in fighter squadrons around the world, the technique persists. Pilots learn to recognize when standard responses won't work. They learn to think three-dimensionally. They learn that survival sometimes demands doing what the manual doesn't say. The lesson isn't about one maneuver. It's about the space between doctrine and reality. Doctrine is essential. It compresses experience into teachable principles, but reality is variable. Combat creates situations doctrine can't predict. In those moments, the pilot who can think beyond the manual has an edge. Michael Vickery gave future pilots that edge, not through brilliance, not through recklessness, but through the simple act of trying something different when everything else failed. War demands conformity. It demands discipline and adherence to tested methods, but it also demands adaptation. The balance between those demands is delicate. Too much conformity breeds predictability. Too much experimentation breeds chaos. The pilots who survive find the balance. They follow the rules until the rules no longer apply. Then they improvise. Vickery's story is not about defiance. It's about recognition. Recognizing when the situation has changed. Recognizing when the old answer doesn't fit the new question. Recognizing that survival might require the one thing no one else has tried. He didn't set out to change doctrine. He set out to live. The change came afterward, built on the evidence of what worked. That's how progress happens in war. Not through grand declarations, but through small discoveries made under fire, tested under pressure, and passed quietly from one generation to the next. The sky over Germany in May 1944 was full of lethal geometry, angles and speeds, closure rates and firing solutions, 8 fighters converging on one target. Standard doctrine said turn. Standard doctrine said dive. Michael Vickery climbed, and the hunters scattered. That moment, brief and terrifying, reshaped how pilots thought about the vertical dimension. It didn't end the war. It didn't turn the tide. But it gave pilots a tool they didn't have before. And tools matter. In combat, a single tool can mean the difference between a name on a memorial and a life lived fully. Michael. Vickery's name isn't widely known. His story isn't taught in history classes, but every fighter pilot who learns to think vertically, to use the dimension no one else expects, carries a piece of his legacy. Not because he was exceptional, but because he was present under pressure and willing to try what the manual didn't cover. That's the quiet heroism of war. Not the medals, not the headlines, but the small acts of clear thinking in moments of chaos. The willingness to trust your judgment when the playbook runs out. The courage to pull back on the stick when every instinct says don't. He climbed. They scattered. And somewhere in that exchange, the war changed, just slightly, in favor of the pilots willing to see the sky as more than a two-dimensional problem. That's the legacy. Not fame, not glory, just a better chance for the next pilot. And in war, a better chance is everything.